some of my board members. I see Bill Barrett there. Radio personnel.
Okay. I think it's about time to get started, Bob. It's 7:05, so might as well start.
All right, we've waited our traditional 5 minutes. Oregonians being somewhat punctual. Good evening, history pubbers and guests. I'm Bob Hart, Executive Director of the Lane County History Museum, and I wish to welcome you to this first of the season's history pubs and our first on Zoom. This partnership with the UO Department of History is in its third season, and we're delighted to continue with Viking Bragg Southtown as our sponsor and our chosen venue when we again get to meet as a group. Good coordination there. In fact, Marcia and I are enjoying their excellent beers and pub fare tonight. We showed you our pints. Okay, Marcia has asked me to explain tonight's departure from our normal speaker routine. Although not born in Oregon, I have enjoyed living here for 17 years now. And as a historian engaged with local history, I became familiar with the controversy surrounding Lane County's namesake early on. Tonight, we're asking questions about the man for whom our county is named and whether today the honor is any longer appropriate. Our Declaration of Independence contains lofty language that we today still struggle to implement. That all men are created equal and that they're endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men and women. We are here to discuss the name of one of those governmental units instituted among men and women, Lane County. As Shakespeare said, what's in a name? We have 6 distinguished panelists tonight to tackle this question. My co-host of the evening, Dr. Marcia Weisiger of the University of Oregon, will introduce our panelists. Each of whom may take 10 minutes for their reflections, to be followed by a Q&A session. I will be holding up hand signals to tell you 2 minutes, 1 minute left time to help everyone along the way here so we can share the podium, so to speak, tonight. Remember, there's a Q&A session after, and if our panelists wish to engage the question, which will come from the chat, merely raise your hand, or in Shannon's case, let us know you'd like to speak. Marcia, please take it away.
Okay, thank you. I'm Marcia Weisiger. I'm the Julian Rocky Dixon Chair of U.S. Western History at the University of Oregon in the Department of History. And we are also very pleased for this work over the years with Bob and the History Museum to put on the History Pub. And I've always wanted to be Vanna White, so I want to do this as I show the Viking Bragg, their small growlers. We encourage you to go. Viking Bragg has been a wonderful co-sponsor last year for our history pubs. And they are unfortunately closed on Mondays, but we tried to figure out a way to link with them. But basically, because they've been so good to us, we want to encourage you to know that Viking Bragg is open Tuesday through Sunday, I believe. And when it's not smoky, they have outdoor seating for those of us who are terrified to eat in a restaurant inside. So I'm one of those. At any rate, I want to introduce our fabulous panel. We sort of put together our dream panel for this, and lo and behold, all of our dream panelists were willing to participate. First, I'm just going to introduce everybody in the order in which they will be speaking. First will be Esther Stutzman, who is a Kalapuya and Coos elder and citizen of the Confederated Tribes of Siletz. She is a traditional storyteller and history keeper and chair of the Kamama Cultural Protection Association. She also, I think, interestingly, won the Governor's Art Award, and I'd love to hear more about that at some point, but at any rate, so that's Esther. Our next speaker will be Eric Richardson, who is the Executive Director and former president of the Eugene Springfield NAACP. And I was thrilled to see that he's also a jazz musician who often plays at the jazz station, which is one of my favorite places to go for fun. So whenever we get to do that again, I encourage us all to do that and go listen to Eric play. Next will be Mark Carpenter, who is a PhD candidate in the UO Department of History, studying Indigenous and US history. He's writing a dissertation that explores how the violence of the American conquest of the Northwest was fought over and forgotten in later decades. And he's also, interestingly, written about Harry Lane, Joseph Lane's son, and I think he will talk a bit about him today. Then Mark will be followed by Shannon Applegate, who is an Oregon historian and a descendant of Charles Applegate, who of course helped blaze the Oregon Trail. She still lives on the family place that was established all that time ago. She's the author of Skookum, I hope I have that pronounced correctly, an Oregon pioneer family's history and lore, among other books. And she too has won the Governor's Art Award. So we have many art award recipients among us. Gregory Noakes is an Oregon historian. I can't say historian today. He is an Oregon historian and the author of The Troubled Life of Pete Burnett, Oregon pioneer and first governor of California, Breaking Chains, Slavery on Trial in the Oregon Territory, and Massacred for Gold, the Chinese in Hell's Canyon. And then closing out, last but not least, will be Pete Sorensen, an attorney who has been a Lane County Commissioner since 1997. I think he's retiring now. But prior to becoming the Lane County Commissioner, he represented the 20th District in the Oregon Legislature from 1993 to 1997. So this is going to be a wonderful panel, and I think we start off first with hearing from Esther Stutzman.
Thank you. Kalapai, which is hello in the Kalapuya language. And I certainly do appreciate having all of you here to listen to, I guess, a plea to please change the name of Lane County. There are so many arguments for and against the name change. One of the reasons why I am so much in favor of the name change is that it will further the understanding and appreciation of the first people of the Willamette Valley, the Kalapuya. There were 13 groups of Kalapuya in the valley before the Europeans came, and each with a distinct government, cultures that were somewhat different, speaking a fairly common language with 3 dialects, a very rich culture, a very informed culture. When the Europeans came, that changed so quickly with the diseases that were brought, literally wiping out entire villages, and the conquerors, people like Joseph Lane, who came and made a wide swath of death for the Kalapuya people. He led campaigns against them, was one of the primary people who encouraged the disappearance of the Indian, the savage, as we were called. I think honoring the Kalapuya with changing the name to Kalapuya County would be a great feather, so to speak, in the cap of Eugene. Eugene has proven to be one of the most understanding cities in respect to honoring the Kalapuya. The talking stones in Alton Baker Park and Willamette Natural Area was certainly appreciated by the Kalapuya people and the entire community that came together to name Willamette Passage the new bridge on I-5. We consider the people of Eugene to be very understanding, and to change the name to the indigenous people who've lived here since the world began, to change that from the name of a man who was responsible for killing all but 600 of the Kalapuya by the time the treaties were signed in 1855. We were once 15,000 strong, and 600 remained in 1855. To honor the Kalapuya with this name, Kalapuya County, would certainly be most appreciated. And we know that Eugene would step up to do that. And I like to make my speeches short and sweet, and I will also toast you with my beverage of choice, which is water. And thank you so much for listening, and I'd be happy to answer questions when the time comes.
Okay, next up is Eric Richardson. And you're muted, Eric.
Greetings. I need to see myself. It's kind of funny how this all works. So thank you, Esther. I'm just, at this point, I am here in support of the wishes of the indigenous people of our state. It's beyond time that we really look at our history in a way of compassion and love, as I also often say. As the president of the NAACP, I would like to remind all of us that the NAACP has been in operation for over 111 years with the intention of correcting one of the wrongs, many of the wrongs actually, that this nation has in its path towards a beneficial and sanctified future. One that we would like to see our nation get to a place that we can be happy about after all the trials and suffering and death. What can we do to move this whole experiment forward? The NAACP has been asking the federal government since 1909 to look at itself and look at the words on the parchment, on the documents, and try to, with our heart and with this feather that my sister spoke about, this feather of righteousness, of truth and balance. It's a symbol that is shared by both the indigenous people of the Americas and the ancient African peoples. A feather that represented the lightness, yet it has weight. So this is what we're asking for of our white compatriots and our white community. Is it's heavy what we're asking, but it's really about lightness. We're getting to a place where we are transcending and getting rid of this heaviness that comes from our cultural past. And I think as this is what we need to do. If I think I could have the capability of sharing my screen, so I have a couple things I'll share. So it's about growth. It's about our future intentions. And as we go forward, I think it's okay to revisit our narrative. And it's not only okay, it's imperative that we revisit our narratives and that we correct when there is needed to be correct, and we highlight when there needs to be highlighted. And this is kind of what we're talking about. So the correction has to do with this next slide I'm talking about here. Let me share my screen. and go, I don't know where this is gonna show me. So I'm just gonna share and then I'm gonna have to figure this out. Okay, boom. All right, so I messed up. Sorry, guys. I lost the actual, no, here I didn't. Okay, here it is. This quote is about the end of the war. And it's just talking about how after the war, American people in the North, the leadership in the North, took a stance of saying that we will forgive the treason, that took place, and we will reach out a hand of brotherhood. And so, as this quote kind of states, the whole idea of a counterfeit varnish of patriotism, so that the participators of the rebellion could go down in history hand in hand with the defenders of the U.S. government. And so this was a betrayal in many ways of the truth of what had happened and what had occurred, and because of familial relationships between white people. Their familial relationship overcame the reality of the suffering and the tragedy that was taken on behalf of a step forward on some white folks, yet they were not willing to fully embrace what that meant when it came to their own family. And we have the same thing happening today in America, because we have families who are split up between our political situation today because we still have not tackled this issue in America. We extended a hand of friendship when it should have been a hand of education and reimagining what the South could look like beyond the 15 to 20 years of Reconstruction. As soon as the guns left, the behavior changed. And that was over 120 years ago. We are behind schedule. If Oregon can make a change, let's do it today. That's what I say. And the Native peoples should be honored throughout the United States for not only their role of being survivors and friends and holders of deep knowledge, but also people who were here for hundreds of years prior to 1776 and indeed informed the Constitution of the United States and the Declaration of Independence and all the other ruminations of our founding fathers were not done in the void. They were done in native lands, in the proximity of native people who were talking to them. So let's honor our true American culture, which is very multicultural from prior to 1776. And that means we need to honor those people who were here. And so that's where I'm at. Although I understand this move to the idea around of Joseph Lane, but I also want to talk about that. I mean, there's validity, nicer guy, whatever. But the reality is, it's a financial freaking decision. That's the nice part about it. We don't have to spend any money. Well, that has always been a reason why not to do the right thing for many circles. So I'm just saying, let's not do half steps. If we're gonna make some change, let's make some change and think about it. And it's about, and I also like to consider the idea of gender equality. How many counties are named after women? And let's make sure that we get some balance on that as well. And the last piece, I think, is just right. And that was just talking about the Kalapuya land once again. And just talking about the magnificent amount of native presence in our state. And I think the lack of appreciation that So when one comes to this state, that they are coming to a very native space that in one time had dense populations of different, diverse, and beautiful people, and that we don't talk about or learn or appreciate enough. And so we should and bring that into our pantheon of learning and understanding. And so thank you. I will give up the rest of my time at that point for the questions at the end. Thanks a lot.
Okay, thank you, Eric, very much. Mark Carpenter is next up.
Hi there. Thank you for making me a part of this, and I'm happy to be part of this broader conversation. So I'm a scholar of kind of pioneer Oregon and how the history of Oregon in its early days was fought over and distorted. I'm also have published some on the Lane family, so both on Harry Lane, the grandson of Joseph Lane, who we're discussing today, and I've done some of my own original research on Joseph Lane proper. So most of my comments will be focused on Joseph Lane and kind of his place in pioneer history. He is an infamous figure for a number of reasons, probably most famously reasons having to do with slavery. He fell from grace at the state level in Oregon after running on the Southern Democratic pro-slavery presidential ticket in 1860 and kind of sealed his fate because of his widely reported and amplified Confederate sympathies during the Civil War after it commenced. He did remain popular in some areas of the state, particularly in his home region in Southern Oregon, but his statewide reputation never really recovered. He's also infamous for not only being a supporter of slavery, but a slaveholder himself. From those we know of, he kept a Modoc and indigenous young man named John as an enslaved person in the early 1850s. And we know that he kept a person of mixed descent, a man named Peter Waldo, who was mixed Modoc and African-American descent, as in a state of unpaid servitude that scholars of slavery would call slavery in everything but name in the 1860s and into the late 1870s. And I'll stress, those are only the people where we know about and we have records for them, right? In a state like Oregon, where slavery was illegal before statehood, there may well have been other people kept enslaved that here or during his time in the Mexican War in Indiana that we just don't have records for. But I do know other speakers planned for today are going to speak on the topic of Lane, slavery, and the Confederacy at some length. So the rest of my comments today will be focused on Lane's treatment of indigenous people and where that story fits into pioneer Oregon as a whole. So kind of expanding on some of what Esther brought forward. So Lane came to Oregon Territory as a governor. He was appointed governor of Oregon Territory right after the US-Mexico War of 1848, where he'd been a major general and where he was responsible for the worst known US war crimes of that conflict, as has recently been unpacked by historians of the US-Mexico War in the sack of Huamantla in 1847, which involved mass murder, pillaging, and rape of the citizens of Huamantla. Joseph Lane was in charge of that. It's unknown whether he participated or merely let it happen. At any rate, it was no problem for President Polk, who appointed him as the territorial governor of Oregon. He stepped down from that position in 1850 and then won elections as first a territorial delegate from Oregon and then a senator from Oregon throughout the rest of the 1850s. And a major focus of his initial appointment and of his political campaigns was on his role as a quote unquote Indian fighter. That was in his political brochures. That was part of why people voted for him. That was why he was appointed, is that he would have a role in fighting Native people and Native communities. The things he's famous for is kind of part in formal wars and peace negotiations. He was given some credit for his part in compelling Cayuse communities to hand over people to be prosecuted and put to death for the killings of the Whitman missionaries in 1850. Those killings had happened for a few years before. That was when the trial happened. It's unclear whether those people had actually committed any of those acts, but Lane kind of is credited with having forced the Cayuse to give over community members to be tried and executed. He was also given credit for negotiating a short-lived ceasefire with some communities of Shasta and Takelma people in 1853 in the Rogue River Valley. It's one small, brief ceasefire in a long-running war perpetrated by Euro-Americans against Native people in the broader areas of Southern Oregon, which sometimes had a name and sometimes didn't. Other than the slavery and the support for treason, these peace treaties are probably what Joseph Lane is best known for in the historiography, and that's not a coincidence. That was according to his aims and the aims of his family. Toward the end of his life in the late 1870s, Joseph Lane tried to craft and burnish a reputation as someone who'd always dealt fairly with Native people, who spoke honestly with them and never broke his word, in part perhaps as a way of pushing against his previous reputation as a Confederate sympathizer and pseudo-traitor. In the early 20th century, his descendants, some of whom were historians themselves, repeated and amplified the story of Joseph Lane as a friend to the Indians. The professional historians who talked to them gave that some legitimacy, right? They provided the source base for that. And so this notion that Joseph Lane was friendly with Native people, that he was virtuous in some way, wormed its way into the historical record and is still maintained by some working historians today. But there are historical sources that show a different side of Joseph Lane and his relationship to Native people that pay much more attention to his violence, both in and out of warfare. And much of that work has come as part of a broader re-examination of just how violent the conquest of the Northwest was. In several times and places in Oregon, across the Northwest, whether there was a war going on or not, gangs of white men would form to commit violence against any indigenous person or community they could find. Sometimes they did this as a reaction to a real or imagined crime. If a white person was found dead under suspicious circumstances, and there were, and I quote one of the perpetrators, saucy and independent Indians nearby, it would not be at all uncommon for the local white dudes to grab their guns, form a posse, and capture or kill all or any Native people they could find in the region. This is most known and perhaps most common in southern and southwestern Oregon in the 1850s. But in my research, I found this kind of violence in many other places in Oregon and the Northwest, including in more northerly sections of Kalapuya land in the late 1840s. Many of the Euro-American participants in these rampages would tell one story to historians, a cleaned up one, but that would then brag about the killings they'd committed when the meetings were more informal, when they were more private, when they were for a different audience. And we know from indigenous sources, past and present, and whispers in the Euro-American archive, that many of these white raiders were rapists as well as murderers. And Joseph Lane was one of them. The historian and anthropologist David Lewis has turned up evidence suggesting that Joseph Lane took part in raids on Native communities in 1851 into 1852, a time when there was no declared war of any sort. There's no reason to think he didn't also take part in other raids when he was in the county. Certainly, his presence as a government official on these unsanctioned raids gave them a legitimacy. That's part of why it's come up in the records. In my own research, I found Joseph Lane writing in his own hand about how fortunate it is when the Native people you are fighting are accompanied by their women and children, because it slows them down and makes it easier to assure that, quote, none will live. Whether or not any of the violence Lane committed rose to the level of genocide, he voiced his approval for exterminatory violence in print under his own name. I've also unearthed a blow-by-blow description of one of Joseph Lane's campaign speeches, one from his successful run for office in 1853. Where, as usual, he bragged about his prowess as an Indian fighter. That's in the print copies of his campaign materials. But what you wouldn't put in print, but what he did say on the stump, was bragging about his participation in the gang rape of Native women. I can't quote exactly what he said because it's got pretty nasty racial slurs in it, but he made it clear that was something that he had taken part in. To put it bluntly, in other words, Joseph Lane was a killer, Joseph Lane was a slaver, Joseph Lane was a rapist. And it's his name that's still stuck on Lane County. I absolutely support renaming the county to Kalapuya. I've put my name to a petition. I think that is the best thing we could possibly do. I think that if that doesn't end up being practicable for some reason, and I really hope it does, picking a better Lane like Harry Lane would certainly be better than leaving Joseph Lane's name on this county. And I'd be happy to answer questions about Harry Lane in the Q&A as needed. But I also want to make sure that whatever is decided, we don't just end the conversation at renaming Lane County. You'd be hard-pressed to find a worse person after whom things are named in Oregon than Joseph Lane. But he was not unique. When Lane bragged about being a killer and a rapist, he did so at a public political rally because he assumed correctly it would get him votes. Violence against Native people was a popular cause in 1850s Oregon, and even those people who did not outright endorse it often opposed it more out of fear of a counterattack than out of any appreciation of shared humanity. There were quote unquote friends of the Indian, but they were in a distinct and sharp minority at that point in Oregon history. Oregon was founded as a white supremacist state. Indian fighters also lynched people of Chinese descent. I've seen the records, they talk about it, they brag about it. One of the worries of the possibilities of Black immigration in early days was the worry that Black folk might combine with indigenous people to fight against white domination. If you look at the votes in the first Oregon Constitution, you will see they were sharply against slavery, they were sharply for statehood. But by far the most popular thing, the thing that attracted the most votes in those initial votes for statehood, was the vote for Black exclusion, to make it illegal to be Black in the state of Oregon. Almost 90% of Oregonians in 1857 voted in favor of that. Almost 90%, 89 point something something. It was eventually overturned by the hard work of the NAACP, but it was there, it was graven, and it was an incredibly popular moment in the 1850s. The essential truth that Oregon was founded by violent white supremacists has been obscured by layers upon layers upon layers of nostalgia over the decades. Part of my broader project is showing how the first generations of historians in the Pacific Northwest deliberately downplayed and erased historical narratives that they found dishonorable, including much of the iniquitous violence. They determined the tone and the terms of the debate and the available evidence in the late 19th and early 20th century. And in many ways, those determinations have shaped and resonated the history that we still tell today. There is still a tendency to avoid violence in many popular retellings of the history of early Euro-American Oregon. There's still a tendency to focus on heroic exceptions among white Oregonians rather than face the widespread acceptance of violence and racism by the polity as a whole. And that tendency to try and focus on heroic exceptions rather than focus on the problem is, of course, by no means restricted to the past. Taking Joseph Lane's name off of this county would be a small and important symbolic step on what needs to be a very long journey towards a better and more just nation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Lots of stimulation there for me. Shannon Applegate is up next.
Naming is powerful. We're living in a time of reframing, revising, re-examining what is important, what we wish to value and commemorate, and it is rightfully open to insightful and even heated discussion. We're living in a time also where we want to humanize history and historical figures rather than lionize. At the same time, I think care should be taken not to demonize in our effort.
They appreciate a heads up that it's coming, and so that they can
Marianne Francis needs to mute.
having those coordination programs and those meetings, I think.
Should I begin again, or what do you suggest?
And once ballots, here once we get to the third week of October, once ballots are out.
I thought you were good. Just keep going.
Keep going.
I can't hear you. That's my problem now.
Keep going, Shannon.
Okay. I just want to repeat this one part. Having said that we want to humanize rather than lionize, those sentimental things that Mark was speaking of, which I think are correct, I do think that it is our responsibility as historians to keep looking at the record and to not demonize in our effort to find the beating heart of the historical truths that we all want to know about. The topic of women, I think, also belongs in this panel discussion. This county naming business is, shall we say, a potential Me Too issue. If even one county in our state was named for a female, as it was pointed out earlier, that would be significant. I frankly wonder how many counties in the United States have been named for females. And yet, in today's Lane County, there are at a 50.8% female population, so slightly over half. And these numbers are rising, including women of color. But here we are in yet another discussion tonight, essentially about a great white man, a so-called Indian fighter, a state, and some would say national hero, a big deal in his time kind of guy from the 19th century, who even back then had his pedestal, so to speak, toppled by much of the population who felt betrayed by him in this state. Mark Carpenter has already referred to Joseph Lane's terrible violations against Indigenous women, something some historians have previously blamed on his underlings and itinerant miners, etc. Quite accidentally, in the course of researching other matters, I was disgusted and dismayed by letters written to Joseph Lane by James Nesmith, who was also an Oregon senator after Lane's own star had fallen. In the 1850s, these two men were very close. Nesmith had even named his oldest son after Ancient Joe, as Joe Lane was known by some. Nesmith's vulgar sarcasm, as he referred to Lane's alleged exploits with Native women, didn't seem to faze the recipient of his letters, as far as I can find out. Lane didn't seem put off in the least by what today we'd call locker room references, wink, wink. Nesmith's letters show, once again, that some frontiersmen of note viewed Native women with disdain, their supposed whoring and diseases, quotes. No respect at all, but what's new about that? And what, by the way, of the white women in General Lane's life? How about Mrs. General Lane? There's actually a biography that's about Mrs. General Lane, as if Polly Lane was not a personality at all on her own part. Lane's wife, Polly Hart Lane, it's not that her lot and treatment at the hands of her husband was too very different from the treatment of many women in her era. The fact was, Polly and Joseph had 10 children, 6 boys and 4 girls, but in 5 years, formative, important years for that family and those children, Joseph spent less than 5 months with his family. While Joe was gone to DC, Polly Lane, trying to keep their farm going in Winchester, Oregon, could neither read nor write, and so she depended on her children to pass along her husband's exploits through his letters. I want to state here, Joe Lane has long been claimed by Douglas County, where he lived much of his life after 1861. He never resided in Lane County at all, whereas the Kalapuya people have resided here for thousands of years, or as my old friend Esther Stutzman would say, since the world began. And as she said, tonight, in fact. In recent years, scholars have claimed that Oregonians objected to slavery primarily on economic grounds. While arguments against slavery were often couched in economic language, I believe informed Pacific Northwesterners fully grasped the far-reaching social and political implications of the heinous, peculiar institution. On the subject of slavery, a surprising number of settlers, especially female ones, felt moral outrage. Uncle Tom's Cabin was present on the plank shelves of many Oregon households. By 1857, 2 million copies had been sold worldwide. In the 19th century, it was second only to the Bible in sales. Langston Hughes observed it was the most cussed and discussed book of its time. Uncle Tom's Cabin transfixed women of all ages because it was about the family. It was about how families were pulled apart by the institution of slavery. It touched a chord, it ignited a spark, even in frontiers so far away as Oregon. And in fact, even here in tiny Yoncalla, where I live and Esther lives now. My female ancestors abhorred slavery on moral grounds. They were not alone. Oregon women were far more politically aware and astute than is generally understood. Many stayed abreast of politics and political figures. They knew General Lane personally. They called him Old Joe in our family. Applegate family women bravely stood apart from the political opinions of their elders at times. Take Gertrude Applegate, daughter of Jesse, who was well-educated and informed for her time. Her father,
2 minutes.
her father, a pro-unionist and against slavery, considered that Gertrude went over to the dark side when she fell in love with an avowed secessionist, James D. Fay. He eventually, deeply aggrieved, scratched her name out of the family Bible with his penknife. That's how seriously they took their politics in those days. Lane, when he was in the Senate, was described by a fellow senator as more Southern than any Southerner. In Washington, D.C., he became known as Doughface, a Northerner with Southern principles. Even Oregon's Democratic Clique, who propelled him to national power, walked away from his growing support of the Confederacy over the years. His hatred of the Republican Party, that infernal Black Republican, sectional, hypocritical, fanatical, Negro-loving party, he wrote angrily to his son in 1861. This man was called the Marion of Oregon, whom many believed would one day be presidential material, who was cheered and lionized as one of Oregon's favorite sons, plummeted like Icarus, melting with his wings melting. Lincoln, who Lane called a no account, a miserable creature, was steering the ship of state when Lane's steamship arrived on the same day in Oregon. Also brought the news of the disgrace, not only of himself, but of the firing of Fort Sumter, the first shots of a terrible civil war initiated by the Confederacies. Oregonians, for the most part, were outraged. Lane met crowds who booed him as they traveled down the Willamette Valley, where he saw himself hung in effigy. Joe Lane, the traitor, it said underneath. I'll finish with an excerpt from a letter from Harriet Applegate, my great-great aunt. But believe me, there's far more to this Joe Lane saga than I can tell tonight. This is a letter written May 13, 1861. Dear Teresa, I think now is the time for women to assert their rights, for they should all have the right to fight. If Southern women are embroidering flags with rattlesnakes, why can't the Northern ones have spunk enough to tear them down? We heard that when Joe Lane landed, he raised a secession flag and began to make a speech. The women broke loose, tore down the flag and burned it in the streets and beat him out with rotten eggs. There's been talk of Joe Lane trying to raise his flag at Roseburg. But if old Joe does, there will be a fight on the Umpqua, for our Republican men there say they will not bear it if they do stick it up. Oh, I hope their women will tear it down. Our president has come under many difficulties and he's showing himself worthy of his office. I am not afraid for our union, for I know that the just God will not give the power into hands of these oppressors of the human race. Your cousin, Harriet Applegate. Let us not have Joseph Lane on the name of Lane County.
Powerful. Thank you very much. Okay, now Greg Noakes is up. You need to be sure to unmute yourself.
Okay, can you hear me now? Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, Shannon, that was great. Wonderful to hear you. That was just terrific. It's a pleasure to be here. I thank the University of Oregon and the Lane County Historical Society for this opportunity. Maybe someday soon it will be the Calapooya County Historical Society, which I think would be wonderful. I'll go back in time on my knowledge about Joseph Lane. Like many Oregonian kids, I learned Oregon history in the 4th grade. And those are pretty impressionable years. When I heard that a guy from Oregon named Joseph Lane had run for vice president, I was impressed by that. And that stuck in my head, for a long time. And I don't know why. That was just the impression a kid gets, I guess. And it was only in later years I realized that he ran on a slave state ticket. And he ran against Abraham Lincoln. And it was partly because of Joseph Lane and John Breckinridge, who ran for president, that Lincoln ended up being elected president. You could make a case for that because the Democratic Party in 1860 had divided between Stephen Douglas and pro-slavery interest on who was going to be the Democratic candidate for president. And they split the vote. The southern states delegations walked out of the convention, and who walked out with them? The Oregon delegation and the California delegation, which gives you some indication of the pro-slavery sentiment that they had in the West in that period of time. Well, I think Lane and Breckinridge ended up with 18% of the vote, and Stephen Douglas ended up with 28% of the vote, something like that. And Lincoln squeezed through with 38% of the vote. But if you added up the split Democratic votes, you could have made a case that Lincoln would not have been elected. Lincoln interacts with Lane in another way. Of course, Lane was appointed territorial governor by James Polk, who himself was a notorious slaveholder, pro-slavery, toward the end of his term. And he was succeeded by Zachary Taylor in 1849, who nominated Lincoln to be the new territorial governor for Oregon, but Lincoln turned it down, so Lane kept the job in that period of time. This was territorial delegate, not territorial governor. He was territorial governor, but became territorial delegate in 1850, where he exerted more power in Congress in that period of time. Anyway, so in the 4th grade, I just learned that Lane had been nominated, had run for vice president, and I was pretty impressed with that, only later to learn the rather sordid history of Joseph Lane. I have no defense for Joseph Lane. I think it'd be wonderful if Lane County changed the name. I think to honor the Calapooya would be so appropriate, and I would love to see it done. It's also interesting where this would lead in Oregon. There are a number of other counties named for notorious slaveholders. There's James Polk, of course. There's Andrew Jackson, of course. Jackson was responsible for not exterminating, but expelling the Native American tribes from Florida and much of the southeastern United States and sending them to the Indian territories. Few people were as hard on the Native Americans as Andrew Jackson. Then there, of course, is Thomas Jefferson. We know about Jefferson, owned 600 slaves, also responsible for the Declaration of Independence, one of many responsible. How do you divide that responsibility between positive and negative? But you could make a case that, well, if you're going to be renaming Lane County and you're going to be renaming other counties, his name ought to be up there too. And then of course there's Washington, who also owned slaves. I think he had 300 or so plus slaves himself. And so you can kind of go, there's four other counties in Oregon which might also want to consider changing their names. Do I think that'd be wise to do? That's for others to decide. But I think it would be very wise for Lane County, because of everything we've heard tonight, to change its name. And I assume that has to be done at the legislature. And I hope that that will be done. I have left over a little time, and I'll be happy to leave that for someone else. Be happy to take questions later. Thank you.
Thank you much. And last but not least, Pete Sorensen.
Thank you very much. Well, first of all, I'd like to thank our panel, all the people. It's been fantastic. Our sponsor, Viking Braggot, as you mentioned, Marcia, it's really great to have a place in South Eugene where you can be outside in normal times and enjoy our wonderful, late spring, summer, and early fall. And so I really appreciate the sponsorship. And of course, the Lane County Historical Museum and Bob Hart. I know that he and you, Marcia, are really the dominant people that set this up. So it's really a privilege for me to be here. I guess I was mainly invited because I'm the only person with the title Lane in my job title that's here. This all started for me many years ago when I was a graduate student at the University of Oregon and in the geography department. And of course, the Oregon Geographic Names Board is one of the entities that's involved in this complex process of naming and renaming and then renaming and renaming things, places, primarily places for the Geographic Names Board. But it advanced for me later when I was working as a legislative assistant for Congressman Weaver in Washington, D.C. And people would ask me, well, what's the biggest county in your district? And I would say Lane County. And I would always say, as Richard mentioned, because I learned this in the 4th grade too, that Joseph Lane was the Democratic nominee for vice president, one of the very few people from the West. I guess Kamala Harris is in that unique group now of people nominated for vice president from the West. And that's about where it ended. And later, maybe as a Lane County commissioner, I was contacted by a number of people on the topic of why is Lane County named for such a truly notorious person as Joseph Lane? And I would first draw a distinction between people in American history like Thomas Jefferson, who, as Richard pointed out, owned hundreds of slaves. And several years ago, I was at the University of Virginia for a program on America's emerging leaders. I won't say how long ago that was, but I was not 69 years of age when I went to this program. But just getting a sense of the things that Jefferson thought was important in his own life, founding America's first public university, writing the Declaration of Rights in the state of Virginia, writing the Declaration of Independence. Doesn't even mention that he was ambassador of France. Didn't even mention he was a United States president or United States representative. These were things that were unimportant in his own mind of what he had contributed. Do we forgive something like slavery? I'm certainly not going to forgive it. But I also think that in comparing the name Joseph Lane, General Joseph Lane, Indian killer, not Indian fighter, Indian killer, we have a responsibility. So when the issue of these Confederate war memorials was being raised in the news media this past spring, I am the one that blurted out at a Board of Commissioners meeting, why don't we examine the names for our community? Why are we named for Joseph Lane? I don't think we should be named for Joseph Lane. Under our rules, under the current Lane County rules, it takes 3 commissioners out of our 5 to get an item moved from, let's say, a brief speech that we call in the trade a remonstrance to an actual agenda item. So I said, I think we ought to have a discussion of renaming Lane County. And one other commissioner said, I do too. But no other commissioners wanted to do it. So it dropped. But the reaction on Facebook and on media, which I don't pay a whole lot of attention to, but was pretty robust. And the next week, we had all 5 commissioners wanting to have this set up as an agenda topic. So that's why this is now in the news. What we've decided to do thus far is to ask the lawyers whether we have authority or not to change the name of Lane County, and whether or not we have the authority to dedicate the name of Lane County. I brought up that King County, Washington was named for one Rufus King, who was not as honorable as Martin Luther King Jr. And so King County decided, as Eric Richardson mentioned in the beginning of this is all tied into, as always with government, well, what is the cost of doing something like this? So the advocates there said the cost of changing the name from King County to King County is negligible, maybe zero. And so that is what is going to be contemplated here. The board also has referred this to our Equity and Access Board. And besides getting the legal views on it, we're also trying to get the considered views of the Lane County Equity and Access Board, which advises the Lane County Administrator on matters of equity and access to county government and county government policies and proposals and actions. So number one, on the legal front, we've learned that the Lane County Board of Commissioners does not have authority to change the name of Lane County, that the Lane County Charter, as you may know, there's different kinds of counties in Oregon. Just to simplify that discussion, we'll just say there's 2 kinds: general law counties and charter counties. General law counties are counties that don't have charters. Charter counties are counties that have charters. Lane County has a charter that's voted in by the people. It's kind of a semi-constitution for the county. And the legislature allows counties to decide how they want to be governed. And so if you're not a charter county, you're just governed by the general law, hence the name, General Law County. By the way, Coos County, where I grew up, is a general law county. But Lane County is a charter county, meaning the name of the county is in the charter. The offices of the county, the commissioners, and where they represent is in the charter. It's only be changed by vote of the people, either by initiative or by the government proposing changes in the charter. So that's one big barrier to changing the name of Lane County, as opposed to rededicating Lane County. Because Lane County is not Joseph Lane County. It could be Penny Lane County. It could be Lola Lane County. By the way, Lola, and thank you, Shannon, for pointing out that this is a Me Too issue, because Lola Lane, and I'm so glad Mark Carpenter's on this, because as you may know, Lola Lane was the spouse of Harry Lane. Harry Lane was born in Corvallis. Harry Lane was mayor of Portland. Harry Lane was a reformer in the Portland city government. He also ran a clinic as a medical doctor for helping poor people. He was elected U.S. Senator, and as a senator, went to bat for the treaty rights of Native Americans, which was a fairly rare thing. And I mentioned Lola Lane because the only article I could find, I'm not a historian, I'm a former geographer, yes, turned even worse lawyer, then even worse politician. But I still retain some academic interest, and I found an article, I think it was a Washington Examiner, but it was a newspaper of the day, and it was sort of a society type article about Mrs. Harry Lane, never mentioning Lola Lane, but Mrs. Harry Lane is now come to Washington, and she and her husband sponsored suffragette commentary when he was mayor of Portland, and she will be bringing these issues of the rights of women in blah, blah, blah. Anyway, there's almost nothing written about her. But what's wrong with a two-step process? We have a rededication for Lola and Harry Lane while our process unfolds to see if there is a community interest in the names or name of indigenous people, and primarily Kalapuya, as being the emerging name. And I've also asked that our legal counsel contact the tribes formally, because we do have, because of the extent and size of Lane County, we do have tribal overlap in areas around the county besides the main area of Eugene Springfield as the Kalapuya people. But having said that, I kind of envision this as a process. And then last but not least, on the legal side, I do believe that the Oregon legislature should take this up, not only because there would be many, many statutes that would have to be changed if Lane County did become a different named county, because there's so many things in Oregon law that talk about particular county names. And because we have some counties in Oregon, like Lane County, that really should have their name changed, most notably Jackson County. So, Bob, am I over my time, or where are we on the time? Commissioners aren't used to being limited, I might add. I don't see Bob's hand up, so I'll just say, okay, I'll just say thank you for putting this panel together. I'm really looking forward to, in particular, Mark's further discussion of Harry and Lola Lane, and the idea of change over time, that we maybe do the rededication. And why are we doing that rededication? Because it's necessary, because it's something that can be done in the present time, and that we have higher aspirations down the road. And why name a county after people anyway? People are flawed. Everyone has flaws. Why not name things after bigger concepts than individuals? So thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Pete. I'm going to take a little prerogative to say that I was a co-author of the report for the U of O on whether we should rename Dede Hall and Dunn Hall. We did the research. And as I was doing the research into the diaries of Matthew Dede, his first name almost escaped me, it was my conclusion, and the rest of the team, we were all thinking like, well, what really needs to be changed? I mean, Dede was not a great guy at all because of his, championing of the exclusion of African Americans in the state constitution. But we all thought the name that really needs to be changed is Lane County. That's the guy that was the bad guy in everything that we were reading in the primary sources. So anyway, that's my 2 cents worth. We'd like to open this up to questions, and the way to do that is you'll see down at the bottom in your little toolbar thing, there's a chat function. And if you would put any questions that you might have in the chat function, then Bob is going to look at that and read off your questions for you so that we don't have to mute and unmute and stumble around like that. You can either ask a question of a specific person or of the group. And if it's a question that any of the panel might answer, you should also indicate that you want to talk so that we just don't talk over each other. Anyway, thank you for that. So send your questions in to the chat function.
I think people are in a state of shock, Marcia.
It does take a second, to actually type in your chat. So, and you just hit the.
Okay, we have a poem from Eric Richardson. Eric, take it away.
All righty. Thank you. Well, Frederick Douglass, in his book, My Bondage and Freedom, wrote, "We raise the wheat and they give us the corn. We bake the bread and they give us the crust. We shift the mill and they give us the husk. We peel the meat and they give us the skin. And that's the way they take us in. We skim the pot and they give us the liquor and say that's good enough for the nigger. It's time for some change, y'all. That's all I got to say."
Okay, Greg Noakes has raising his hand. So Greg, take it away.
I have a question for Marcia on the changing or removing Dee Dee's name from the University of Oregon Law School, which he helped to found, which I thought that was a great move to do because it was sponsoring slavery at the Constitutional Convention. And but wasn't there an earlier decision not to change his name? And then wasn't it because of the Black Lives Matter movement that this then became a focus again, and that forced the change? Am I right on that? Could you talk about that for a second?
Sure, you're absolutely correct. I would say that what President Michael Schill was looking was to see whether there had been sort of the kinds of discussions that we've had about Thomas Jefferson, that there's good things and bad things, and how to weigh those things. And he was looking for some sense of an evolution. And I have to say that my personal opinion is that there was no evolution. He continued, although for political reasons, because Dee Dee did believe that once the Civil War started and the South seceded and it fired on Fort Sumter, that was treason. And he changed his party affiliation, I mean, almost literally the next day. And he became he was a supporter of the law, and then opposed the South and the Democratic Party, and favored all the measures that were put into place in the wake of the Civil War and the early years of Reconstruction. We also found that he was a champion of Chinese immigrants, in part because he believed it was a treaty violation to exclude the Chinese from the United States. And he was also a champion of Native people to at least some extent, particularly the Nez Perce. But it wasn't an evolution over time. It was simply he held complicated sets of racial ideas all at the same time about various people. And so Michael Schill, for whatever reason, the reason he gave was that he thought that Dee Dee had evolved in thought. And that's, I will say that he did a very good reading of our report, except for really thinking about the chronologies. Just because a particular event happened last, which is true, the support for Chinese people in particular, that doesn't necessarily mean that those other ideas had gone away. And we also had found that he was a supporter of a particular decision about Native American citizenship that became a landmark case for denying citizenship to Native Americans until that was the Citizenship Act of 1924. So, but the Black Lives Matter issue pushed him to rethink that, I think, and see that, our job as professors and teachers is to create a learning environment for our students. And it was interfering with the learning environment for our students, who, particularly African American students and Native students, who felt personally painfully hurt by the presence of those symbols on the campus. And finally, Michael Schill decided that enough was enough, and he changed it. So at any rate, we were not, we were given the option of not actually expressing our opinion in the report, and then we chose to do that from the very beginning because we knew it would be a political issue. And so we withheld our opinion, but we all, as a group of scholars, felt that taking the name Dee Dee off of the building was the right thing to do.
Thank you, Marcia. We've got a whole bunch of questions at this point. Steve Deere, to the entire panel, a rhetorical question. What's the cost to our souls for not changing the name to Kalapuya County? This is their land. Please do not speak of financial cost to this in 2020. It's time for some change. That's all I got to say. Panelists, response.
Well, the NAACP thinks that the racial discrimination and the racial climate of our nation has been a stain on our soul for a long time. So I agree with him that this is about soul work, and we don't forget our past, but we need to elevate our future and elevate our young people and elevate all the people who have given to us in different ways. Now, there's negatives and there's positives for all of our actions, but going forward, we can choose. And I think this is an opportunity for us to choose a different path.
Esther, please unmute yourself.
All of my life, I've been want to say pro-Indian, but promoting the Native culture. And when the subject of mascots came up, changing the school's name from a Native name for a mascot for the school, the first thing that people throw in our faces is, how much is it going to cost? It's not, gee, we can't do it now because we can't get enough support, or we don't think it's a good idea. It always comes down to how much is it going to cost. And really, there's not an answer to that. And so that, you know, I don't get snarky with the people. I just tell them, well, give us a figure, and then we'll try to help you reduce the cost, but it needs to be done. One of the schools that had a mascot actually suggested that if they took the feather off and shaved the head and called it a warrior, would that suffice? And I said, no, it won't suffice. The naming of things that insult another race of people is just unconscionable. And sometimes when I'm speaking to a class in college or in high school especially, I always tell them, how many of your holidays, how many of your buildings and streets and mountains are named Osama bin Laden? It's the same thing. We were trying to change the name of Columbus Day. Columbus was nothing but a terrorist. So let's celebrate the day of some other terrorist. People don't see the connection on how badly this hurts. It hurts personally, it hurts your heart. And that's why we are trying so hard to change the name of Lane County to Kalapuya to honor my ancestors.
I think Mark had his hand up to address this too.
Thank you.
No,
Mark, take
Pete's
it
had
away.
his hand up several times, so I'll be brief. I think I've as I've expressed and I'll re-express, right, it should be changed to Kalapuya County. And where I'm in an awkward position as a historian of Harry Lane, who's been presented as the alternative, but it should be renamed Halapuya County. I think the question about rededication is whether a rededication first would blunt the movement for that name change. Whereas I would, if I am a neophyte activist and a worse politician, so I'm a historian. I do my best. But I would have concerns if when we started with a rededication that would blunt the movement for the name change that is a much more desirable goal. That said, if there was a vote for a name change and it failed, I would absolutely support a rededication as much better than just leaving things as they are because people didn't vote for a name change through whatever reason.
Thank you, Mark. We have both Richard Steers and Kirby Brown supporting Pete Sorensen's two-stage approach and following up on Pete's discussion of the procedures to stage a name change. Okay, and Dick Zeller now says thanks so much to the presenters. I'm kind of skipping that. Everyone has said thanks so much to the presenters. I'd like to see Lane County renamed, preferably something that would honor Native peoples. I like Kalapuya as an option, but I foresee some difficulty in getting the whole county to agree on a name. I've heard the possibility of naming our county after the Siuslaw. The east, middle, and west of the county are not now, maybe never have been a unitary culture. Feels like an opportunity to revisit our divisions. Would anyone, perhaps Esther, would you like to take that on?
I was astounded when you said that. Most of Lane County lies in Kalapuya territory. Portions of the county are within Siuslaw territory. So I would strongly champion calling it Kalapuya County for the majority of the people whose land this is.
Okay, thanks, Esther. Amanda and Diane now. Following on Kirby's question, how do we contribute to the effort to stage a renaming? This is an educational session. A lot of public education is needed to make clear how right a name change is. There should be a discussion about the name. So many good points are being made tonight. Thank you. So thank you to all the panelists. Mark Siemens, to everyone, has there ever been any polling to get a read on the public sentiment around a change to Kalapuya County?
One thing I'll just comment on a few things. First of all, shockingly enough, in a county as large as Lane County, there is a difference of opinion on the Board of Commissioners, and the more conservative elements to them. The cost of a change is a big stated reason, but as Esther points out, that is almost always the issue in any progressive political decision. Oh, we can't have everyone voting. Wow, we'd have a lot of voters then. Or we can't have everyone get access to public education. That would be very expensive. So no matter what the progressive political issue is, the opponent will either for legitimate reasons point out that there will be a high cost, or as a subterfuge for their opposition to the idea will point out that there's cost associated with it. But the questioner posed it as a moral choice, and I think that's where we have fallen short. Lane County should not be named for Joseph Lane, and the faster we can get that changed, the better in my mind. As to the future, I think it's been very educational for me to hear more about from Esther about the sort of traditional lands of the Native peoples, and in particular, there is a pending petition to create a Siuslaw County. That petition was filed by people in Western Lane County several years ago. They don't want to be part of Lane County, not because they don't like Joseph Lane, because they don't like the rest of the people in Lane County. who reside to the, to the east of them. I think they wanted to make that boundary approximately at the Peterson Tunnel, so that anything west of that would be part of Siuslaw County, and anything east of that would be called Lane County. That petition is still pending, and the Board of Commissioners inquired about it about 5 years ago. Okay, how long do these petitions to separate, how long do these, are they around? And the answer is they're around forever. So until it is not approved, it is pending. So that's something, if the other requesters or people out there that are watching this want to know, well, what can I do? Obviously, the major group involved with this would be the Lane County Board of Commissioners, but also this Equity and Access Board. I know Eric Richardson has had some contact with them and their staff, Mo Young. They will have a lot to say about this. Also, the Oregon legislature, particularly in renaming general law counties such as Jackson County, they will have a big say in it. And then last but not least, there's nothing that stops any Lane County resident from making their own initiative. And as far as I know, there has been no initiative filed on the topic of changing the name of Lane County. It would have to be a charter change, so it could be presented by a voter as a charter, proposed charter amendment.
Okay, Rick Steers again has said, why can't we work with Western Lane County to wind up with 2 counties named after local Indian communities? Anyone want to take that on?
We could do that.
It could be a whole separate
Esther?
history
I
book.
think that might be a good idea. If we could agree on what geographical place would be a good dividing line.
Maybe
that
not.
That might be a subject of some heated discussions.
Okay, Dick Zeller says, thank you, Pete. I certainly didn't intend to disparage anything Esther is pleading for. I agree. I think the political divisions of the county are part of the problem. I would be happy to live in California County. Okay, Daniel Robertson, to everyone, wouldn't it benefit everyone in Lane County just to have a discussion around a proposed amendment? Wow, I think Daniel's interested in education. Just a guess. Carl Norgard, to everyone, thank you for all of this. Name change to California is our moral responsibility. Now is the time. Ayumasi. I probably butchered that, Esther. I apologize, but
That's
I
okay.
tried.
We all have to learn.
What is the proper pronunciation?
It's very close. Hayumasi.
Ayumasi. Ayumasi. Thank you.
It's not, that's Chinook. It's not Kalapuya, but
Ooh, okay.
one of the things that we've run into when we were talking about renaming things, and I started on the path of trying to rename things, 30, 40 years ago. Even speaking to the Geographical Name Board, who said that the Indian names are too difficult to pronounce.
Oh.
And I told them, then why don't you change the name of After Heidi Drive?
Yeah.
It just seems that there's always some excuse for resistance to anything that's different. I've had several discussions in my family and other people about the suggestion that the county be named for someone other than Joseph Lane, a relative. And we spoke about that tonight. I think the name Lane would be something that would still trigger the memory of Joseph Lane's misdeeds. That's personally what I think.
Anybody else?
Anybody else? Oh, something just popped.
Okay, Greg Noakes said it was clapping. Greg, do you want to weigh in?
I think, yeah, I think Esther is exactly right. And naming it for Harry Lane, for example, one could make a case for that, but it would seem like a weak half step. I mean, if the name should be Calapooia County, which I would fully support. I think it's a wonderful idea. They're sort of taking a half step to Harry Lane and then to say, well, someday maybe we'll go on and name it Calapooia County. Somehow you may never get there. And so let's bite the bullet and make the big step. Where I live in Multnomah County or Clackamas County, so I can't be we, but I think it's a wonderful idea to change to Calapooia and go the whole big step.
Thank you, Greg. It obviously is the danger with Pete's suggestion. On the other hand, politics is what has been called the art of the possible. So, you know, maybe a half step in the right direction ultimately gets us there. And we just don't know how long it might take.
Bob, let me interject in that this is a time for great change. We do not know where we're going in this country at this particular point in time. We know we're going somewhere. We're going there in a big way. And I would think that it's a time for big change, not little half steps. And that's how I would consider that kind of a name change. My 2 bits worth.
Okay, thank you. Pete, do you want to respond to that?
I think that we have a journey of 1,000 miles, and I believe that it's commonly assumed that the journey of 1,000 miles begins with the first step.
Bob?
Yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a correction partially about something. You know that we do have a Josephine County, yes? But Josephine County is actually apparently named for Josephine Creek. And to just show you how offhand this gesture towards females is, Josephine Creek maybe is named for someone named Virginia Josephine Rollins Ort. Now, did she make blackberry jam, or what was it that she did that brought her attention? But really, they're saying it, that Josephine Creek is what it's named for. So it's kind of backhanded. It's one step away from actually naming it for a woman.
Thank you, Shannon. Would anyone else like to pick up with this? Okay, Kit Siebert to everyone. Does the 2-stage procedure take the power out of the argument to change to Calapooia by making it Lola Lane? So do you lose the ultimate Calapooia change if we do Lola rather than Harry, or Harry and Lola? Pete.
I'll just say briefly, there is nothing stopping any resident of Lane County who is an elector, a registered voter. There is nothing stopping them from making a petition to change the charter of Lane County, to change the name to Calapooia County, Siuslaw County, Lola Lane County. There's nothing that stops individuals or groups from sidestepping the politics of the current or future Lane County Board of Commissioners. Nothing at all stops group action. And so if all the people that do favor this change and want to make this change immediately, tomorrow, they can go down and sign that petition and write that petition up and get it signed and get it certified and get it circulated and return the necessary signatures. I think it's around 10% of the registered voters of Lane County, roughly, let's say 20,000 signatures. And that will be on the ballot by operation of law. So there's nothing that stops that. But the reality, I think, has been that the voices, mine being a very lone voice for many years, to get even this discussion going has taken a great long period of time. And fortunately, the county will get a new commissioner after 24 years in January, and there'll be a new commissioner who will be having to answer these same questions of why can't we do something that everyone on this panel seems to like? Well, the answer is there's lots of other people out there, and they are powerful, and they don't want to make this change in any way, let alone small, let alone big. Because it isn't just a matter of, as Esther pointed out, oh, the opposition being cost. How are you going to pay for it? No, it's a deeper, much more deeper thing. And that is they don't want, and believe me, I get a lot of hate mail as a Lane County Commissioner, and just making these suggestions that we look at changing the name of the county has brought a tremendous opposition of people that just do not want to revisit. Their view is we don't need to revisit this history. Everyone knows this history. So what? You know, it doesn't matter to me. I didn't even know what Lane County was named for anyway. That's the kind of denial that we have in our society about the racial issues that we confront.
Mark Carpenter had his hand up, but before he speaks, I just want to point out that Kari Norgard asked how we get access to the petition that Esther has mentioned. How do we sign?
Unless I miss my guess, isn't the only petition that Pete said exists having to do with the name change to Siuslaw County?
Well, I want to draw a distinction between petitions. There's a formal segregation petition to create Siuslaw County. That's pending. It's not active, but it's pending. It's been inactive for many years. The petition, I believe, that that has been circulated online some way is an informal petition. I'm not sure who it's petitioning. Might be petitioning the Lane County Board of Commissioners, but it's not a petition in the same sense of changing a charter, such as changing the name of Lane County. That's what I mean by there's no petition. But there is a petition. There's an online petition that I've heard about.
Does anybody know where to access that petition? Who's here tonight? No. Okay. Well, have to find out. Thanks, Mark.
So I guess first I'd put out, if there are any lawyers on this meeting who have enough knowledge to put together a formal petition, I strongly urge you to do so. And then I would love to be a signatory on that ASAP if I was in the right county. But I guess I had a question for Pete, kind of sprung by that, because one of the things has come up in the comments is looking for a reason why can't we not rededicate, take the momentum, go all the way for a name change. Pete, do you foresee that there is a clock on the possibility of rededication? Do you think that this is a period where the county commissioners would agree, but say when you step down, that agreement might disappear, and so we might be left with no options unless a vote succeeds?
No, I think that the issue of rededicating Lane County is becoming a bigger and bigger item of public discourse. And I think it's because people realize more and more what people on this panel already knew, and that is the sort of sordid history of Joseph Lane. And they don't want the county name for Joseph Lane. As to what they might agree on for a name, that is a very wide open topic. And incidentally, another component legally to change a name is counties are not allowed to do advisory votes. Like, okay, would you like to name this South Calapooya County? Would you like to name it Calapooya County with a K? Would you like to name it Calapooya with a C? would you like to name it Siuslaw on the west side and Kalapuya on the 2/3 east side of the present Lane County? We're not allowed to do that. We're allowed to say, this is it. This is the change we are proposing to you. And so it's that latter thing that's got the complexity. And that's why maybe this will come by formal petition where someone says, I really want to get the name changed, not just in a kind of a politician incremental one step toward a goal of changing the name and just doing the rededication, but really the whole hog, doing the whole thing and doing it, without regard to what existing elected officials think, because that's the beauty of our initiative system that we have in Oregon that will bypass the representative form of government. It also has its drawbacks, namely that it leads to the potential of mob violence, and some even have said it violates the provision of the U.S. Constitution that says that states will guarantee to their citizens a Republican form of government. And the initiative is not anything like a give and take of the legislative body. So that's another thing out there. But the pure short answer to your question is this either needs to be done by the electors of Lane County, either because their commissioners have asked them to make the change or that they have initiated legislation to change the name.
I'd like to point out quickly that several people have put in the chat function, which everybody can look at, 3 different links to petitions. So I think there might be a problem of being multiple petitions, but at any rate, or maybe they're the same ones, maybe there's some overlap. But anyway, if you can look on the chat function, you can get some links. And you may need to click on it now. I don't believe that the recording that we'll be making and posting actually captures the chat. So if you wish to go to those links, you need to go now onto the chat. There are several people, I'm going to say, who've joined in. I'm going to point out, read from a couple of people here. Patience Collier to everyone. I'd like to add to what Kit, Mark, Steve, and Esther have pointed out about the half step of a Harry or Lola Lane County. It makes me think of Lois Lane. 2 years ago, when we had less momentum, excuse me, behind the name changes and de-lionization movements, a different lane seemed like it was the most that could be done. But now, with the wealth of information about Lane's crimes against humanity and the momentum of the political moment, wouldn't it be worthwhile to go all the way to Kalapuya County, I mean. And then someone else, Amanda P. says, thank you everyone. We'll be staying tuned to learn how to help forward the distancing from racist and misogynistic names. It's important. And then Nanosh Lucas has said, I want to join my voice with Esther's in support of a full measure. She described eloquently and graphically how half measures are not sufficient, how they don't acknowledge injury, and how they can create further harm.
Dick Zeller is saying that one can select everything in chat and copy it to a document on your own system. Oops, I tried to copy, it doesn't work. Oh, well.
One thing I wanted to mention is that Esther raised a very important point to me this evening that I had not, it had not been brought to my attention, let's put it that way. I didn't know. And that is the continuation of the name Lane for, Lane Apex Garbage Collection or Lane Community College or Lane County Sheriff or Lane County Commissioner Pete Sorensen or anything with Lane, that is simply bringing up more and more and more the word Lane that has such a horrible imagery here. And quite frankly, that's a feature of this whole, name rededication thing that I really had not appreciated. I know, and I really want to thank her for bringing that up, because that does change, in my mind, a bit of my own enthusiasm for the shorter term thing. Quite frankly, things take so long in government that I don't think I can even really accomplish even that at this point. But due to the fact that we have currently 3 national emergencies going on in Lane County right now. But I just wanted to thank her for that reminder that that it isn't just a matter of taking off the name and then Joseph Lane and then having Lane. Oh, still, who was it really named for? Lane County, Joseph Lane, the terrible Joseph Lane. So I just think that's a learning moment, and I think that when I originally suggested that we look into a whole name change, the most conservative elements in the county actually thought that was a great idea, because it would stop the renaming, which they really were opposed to. So that may be a learning moment for me also. So this has been very valuable. Thank you to all of you.
Sounds to me like he's back on board with the change.
Sounds like overwhelming support for go all the way.
If there are no other questions on, or no more discussion on this, I have a question on another Joseph Lane issue, which I've wondered about.
Okay, Greg, go
there
ahead.
It was, maybe for Shannon or Mark, was there an assassination on Joseph Lane when he came back from Washington in 1861? He was shot and wounded on his way back to Douglas County. And Jesse Applegate took him into his house and nursed him back to good health. Lane had said that he accidentally shot himself with a shotgun, but there are also rumors that came out of that time that there was actually an attempted assassination against him and that he was actually carrying weapons for a possible uprising in Oregon. Anybody have any information that they can share on that?
No, I'll take it. I do have a little information to share on that. The letter that I read from Harriet Applegate a little while ago had a PS attached to it. And it was from her cousin, John Miller. And he said, I wish I had a copy of my book here, I could tell you exactly. But he said, old Joe Lane has been shot. It is a fact. And he's been taken to the home of a good Republican, Jesse Applegate, to recover. So there is actually documentation of that, or at least as far as the nephew, who's a nephew of Jesse's, was concerned at that time. It's a strange thing. Jesse Applegate had relationships with some interesting people who were not necessarily Whigs or Republicans. And he had a relationship with Lane that was sort of, I think, went back to the very, very early first days that Lane was here. And also to the fact that, the currency of all these politicians in that time was to hand out jobs, essentially. So he gave Jesse Applegate a job, a patronage, or very early to do the surveying for the Scots Military Road. And I think that that Jesse had appreciated that. It was legitimate. Jesse was a good surveyor. But so he had some tolerance for Lane, just incidentally, as Jesse had a relationship with Matthew Deedy that went on for many, many years, an extremely rich and historically important correspondence with Dee Dee, although there was a terrible falling out in the end. And by the way, Dee Dee had his fingerprints all over Joseph Lane's career in the early time because of his connection with the Salem clique, but that's another story. What happened with Jesse and Lane over here around, I mean, I can almost see where this was taking place, the house over here. What wouldn't a person like to know what that conversation was like between this Whig Republican and this very, I'm sure, desperately depressed man at that point? And by the way, how is it that the Marion of the Mexican War accidentally shot himself in the right shoulder with his revolver? That sort of doesn't ring true. It sounds like a little bit of a cleaning up a story that somebody didn't want to get out. Jesse and a lot of men here around Yoncalla had what they would call union clubs. And these union clubs were sort of antidote to all of the stuff and nonsense about the Pacific Republic that was going on at that time when they were going to break away. But that's another story too. It's a very interesting one, but not for tonight. So I do think that there's also a contradiction in the record that I would love to sort out. Nina Fabian Lane Fabian, Mark probably knows something about, who wrote a sort of something about her grandfather, Joseph. And she was one of the people who really wanted to clean up his image, wanted to clean up Joe Lane's image. She said that, and so did, by the way, Lane's biographer, that Jesse was shot 4 miles north of Winchester, which is a long way from Yoncalla. And I really don't know what the basis for that report was. But I do know that what John Miller had to say about old Lane as being taken to see a good Republican seemed pretty definitive and is a matter of record. So I'm going for the fact that he was shot in front of what was the Snowden's house, where there used to be a hot spring and so forth, and then taken up to Jesse's, which was next door. So it'd be great to be a fly on the wall for a lot of this stuff. It really would be. But Lane did kind of drop out after that. That's for true. But he did have guns with him. He was carrying guns in this wagon, Sharp's rifles, and there were a number of them. So what were they about? Was he in fact taking them home as sentimental souvenirs from Washington, D.C. for his sons, who were all pro-Confederate and who were very interested in this Pacific Republic idea that would withdraw from the Union? Or was there something innocent about that and it was all just chance? I know that Lane wounded himself for the 3rd time in the same place, in that same shoulder. So that's interesting too. On his right, he must have been right-handed. So there's a lot to speculate about, but I think also some factual information about this. And this great plot to overturn the Republic is interesting too.
So I'll go ahead and jump in if I may.
Please.
So there are a number of fantastical plots that have been proposed that with the notion that the very real and widespread Confederate sympathizer movement in Oregon was always just about on the edge of overthrowing the government and creating a Pacific Republic. And I absolutely believe that they talked about that over beer. But I have yet, I've read some people who studied this. I've read, again, many of the same sources you have, Shannon. I have yet to see much in the way of a concrete conspiracy of any sort from Lane or for others. And it has been pointed out, I am no defender of Joseph Lane. He is the worst. But if he'd wanted to be a Confederate, he could have gone and been a Confederate. That was within his power the way it was in the power of his sons. He was a sympathizer, absolutely. He was on board with the Confederate cause. I have not seen convincing evidence that he was plotting the vast conspiracy. And I have seen excellent evidence that that's the sort of stuff that sells papers and gets people voting, because there is a vast Confederate sympathizer movement and there are people being shot in the street about it. I take the fact that he injured himself multiple times with the firearms that he loved, and his own statement about what happened, that he shot himself by accident for the third time. If I was putting money on it, I'd say he shot himself by accident, because that's what he said he did. And I see no reason why he would participate in a cover-up of Republican malfeasance, given how much he hated Republican Party members. I absolutely believe, moreover, that the Applegate family was afraid that he would be assassinated, because he was despised by many aspects of the Republican Party because of, all of the terrible things and support for the Confederacy. Speaking to Nina Lane, and she informed many of his biographers in the 20th century, one of the difficulties of working with Nina Lane's papers is that she was she drew further and further into conspiracy theories in the 1930s. So I've read through several drafts of her biography of Joseph Lane, and they're strange and depressing reading, because she'll go back and rewrite, and her handwriting will get more spidery and unsteady. She eventually came to the conclusion that Jesse Applegate was a key figure in a vast conspiracy with Abraham Lincoln at its head to kill Joseph Lane and many, many other the people that she liked in history. And she had an intricate web of conspiracy theories without any obvious factual basis in the 30s. But she was still being spoken to by one of Joseph Lane's first biographers. I can't remember her name offhand, but her book came out in 1949. And so some of those rumors have kind of trickled down from some mix of undigested rumors of the 1860s, and frankly, and kind of sadly, somebody who was using more conspiracy theories than facts towards the end of her life. And they'll say even Nina Lane, and her very first draft of Joseph Lane, angrily denounced the notion that he was a slaveholder. And then in her second draft, she went and just crossed that out and never said anything more about slavery. So even his most ardent defender was like, no, he was a slaveholder. But the kind of broader conspiracy theories, it could be true. Certainly there were Confederate sympathizers. I am skeptical.
If I can weigh in for a moment, I just want to point out that Joseph Lane's one of his youngest sons, John, was at West Point when the Civil War started and became at least a major a major in Robert E. Lee's Army of Northern Virginia, and ultimately after the war, became an Indian agent, a recipient of the spoils system in Lewiston, Idaho, and he's actually buried up there. But the Historical Society up there has actually written up an interpretive plaque on John Lane, son of Joe Lane, the first territorial governor and U.S. senator, vice presidential candidate, all that stuff. But John Lane left West Point and became a Confederate officer.
There was another branch under Nathaniel. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, the career of Lane, as he became increasingly involved in the Confederacy, includes the hotel that he stayed at in Washington, D.C. when he was there. His friendships with men like Senator Gwynn and Isaac Stevens. These were men who were known to, whether it was a fantasy, imaginatively, Mark, or whether they meant it by intention, these men were very much in favor of a Pacific Republic, at least in discussion. And these were close, if I may use the word in another way, Confederates of Joseph Lane, and had a profound influence, I think, on him and on his development of Southern sympathies. And certainly all over this country, there were these little groups, like, for example, in Ohio even, where people swore that they would get Lincoln and wade in blood up to their knees, that they were going to use Black people and probably Indian people and perhaps Orientals, in quotes, as well, to form and break off in this Pacific Republic. The thing was, whether or not it actually came to pass, it had a powerful influence on the people of the time in terms of conspiracy. And I don't think it was QAnon, But I do think there was something going on there that was in people's psyches and that helped shape the history and people's ideas at the time.
Gregory Noakes, do you want to say something about this since you've delved into Oregonians in California and the Pacific Republic? You need to unmute.
You're muted, Richard.
I think there was quite a bit to the idea of the Pacific Republic. Just how deep into that lane was, I'm not sure. I was trying to look up the name of some other people who were involved here in the Pacific Republic movement. And I believe they did arm themselves, but they didn't actually pull a trigger because they were waiting for the South to win, and then they were to act. I can't give you a whole, it was called the Knights of the Golden Circle was the name given to the conspiracy at the time, primarily based in the South. They had several newspapers that supported them in this period. And a couple of very prominent Oregonians were involved. I'm not sure of Lane's involvement, but I'm positive he would have been sympathetic to the movement.
One other piece that's interesting, Lane in earlier years was in Cuba just briefly. And while he was in Cuba on a trip back east, he saw the assassination of a Cuban person who was in authority. The Golden Circle referred to states around the Mediterranean, around the Caribbean. And Cuba was a big part of this idea of the Golden Circle. That was the Golden Circle. Texans and all those folks, they wanted to be sure that the slave states came in and so on and so forth. So Lane had, in several things that he wrote, did talk about Cuba and the inevitability of the annexation and importance of the annexation of Cuba. So that's another little piece that sort of points to his being interested in this, this big idea of the Knights of the Golden Circle and the Pacific Republic.
Certainly was. I'd also, that was a staple of the Democratic platform throughout the 1850s, was the inevitable and to be desired annexation of Cuba. You'll see that in just about the whole decade. And I wanted to mention that another branch, Nathaniel Lane and a few other members, were looking seriously and visiting to attempt a filibuster in Sonora if the South lost, so that they can try and take over a chunk of Mexico the way William Walker had very temporarily taken over Nicaragua. And again, they didn't go through with it, but they were plotting, and he was trying to get his dad on board. And he didn't, but it was definitely in the air that that might be the sort of thing that one could do. So it was definitely around. I just, I balk a little bit at the assassination attempt story. That one.
Well, with that, I'm going to have to say we're at time. And so I want to thank all of you for coming and being the first Zoom audience that we've had, this experiment to see if people would actually come and spend a couple of hours. So thank you so much for coming. We are going to be posting a recording of this, I believe, on the History Museum website. It's been recorded while we're watching. I'm going to send that to Bob. I also took a screenshot of those different petition links, and I will also send those to Bob, and he can post those there where you can find them, and I'll talk with the powers that be in the history department to see if we might get that posted on the history department website as well. So again, thank you all. Please go and stop by Viking Bracket and buy a beer or a sandwich. And we hope to have a program in October. We know we have a program in November. So please stay tuned. Check in on the Facebook pages of both entities here, and we hope to see you again. Anything else you think about?
We can't tell you the October speaker yet, but the November speaker is Mark Harris on We Too Are Eugene. So a little bit of Black Lives certainly matter.
Yeah.
Well, thank you guys. Thank you. Appreciate the society for being here.
Thanks to all of you, and thank you so much, all of the presenters. We really appreciate it.
All right,
Great
Esther,
to
good
be here.
night.
Good night.
Everybody.
Thank you, Pete.
Thanks to the presenters.
Thank you, Pete.
All right, Shannon.
Thank you, Pete.
Thanks for everybody. Thanks for everybody.
Thanks, Bart.
All right, good night.
Thanks, Shannon.
Ciao, Pete.
Thanks,
All
Esther.
of you. Thank you, Esther.
Thanks, Gregory.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kari, for showing up. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Mel. You're one of the most loyal of our folks.
I think he's the #1 loyal person, actually. Thank you all.
Thanks, Anash.
Sure.
So much.
We're all set, right?
Yeah, we're good.
Okay. All right. You guys have a good night.
Yeah, thank you.
Good. Yes. All right, so
Really good. I mean.
Oh, I guess I have to be here, so I need to leave the meeting.